Saren Coleman's hands trembled as she folded the silk shirt, one of hundreds she'd laundered in Rafael Fernandez's penthouse over the past 6 months. She'd perfected the art of being invisible, eyes down, movements efficient, never speaking unless spoken to. It was survival. In a world where powerful men like him existed in one universe and women like her scrambled in another, invisibility kept you safe. But today, desperation had shattered that carefully constructed shield. Sir. Her voice barely rose above a whisper as she stood in the doorway of his office, the place she'd been explicitly told never to enter unless summoned. Raphael didn't look up from the document spread across his mahogany desk. The late afternoon sun streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows caught the sharp angles of his face, the kind of devastatingly handsome that made her heart skip even as fear knotted her stomach. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his charcoal suit tailored to emphasize broad shoulders that had seen violence she could only imagine. "I need to ask you something." The words tumbled out before courage abandoned her completely. "Something unusual." Now he looked up. Dark eyes, the color of espresso and just as intense, fixed on her with an attention that made her skin prickle. When Rafael Fernandez looked at you, really looked at you, it felt like he could see through flesh and bones straight into your soul. "I'm listening," he said, his voice carrying that faint Italian accent that colored certain vowels, making even simple words sound like velvet wrapped around steel. Saren swallowed hard. This was insane, impossible. But she'd run out of options 3 days ago when her sister Mira had called with that specific tone. The one that meant family judgment was coming whether you wanted it or not. "I need you to pretend to be my husband just for one day." What could drive a woman to ask the most dangerous man in New York such an impossible favor? The answer lies in a lie told 6 months ago and a family that wouldn't understand the truth. But what Saren didn't know was that her innocent request would unravel everything Rafael Fernandez had built his empire to protect, including his own guarded heart. 6 months earlier, Saren had been desperate for any job that paid more than minimum wage. Her mother's medical bills were crushing her, and her younger sister Amira's college tuition wasn't going to pay itself. When the employment agency mentioned a live-in housekeeping position in Manhattan's most exclusive building, she jumped at it without asking questions. She should have asked questions. Rafael Fernandez's name didn't mean anything to her then. She didn't know that his import-export business was code for one of the most powerful crime families on the East Coast. She didn't know that the other staff members avoided eye contact with him, not out of respect, but out of pure primal fear. She didn't know that the security detail that flanked him everywhere were armed soldiers who'd killed for him without hesitation. She learned all of this within the first week. By then, it was too late to leave. The money was too good, and her mother needed it too badly. But the money came with a price. Complete discretion. No questions, no curiosity, no personal connection to the man who owned the penthouse, where she now lived in a small staff room tucked near the kitchen. So when her sister Amira had video called 3 months into the job, asking why Sarah never had time for family anymore, why she was always too busy to visit Brooklyn, the lie had slipped out before she could stop it. "I met someone," Saren had said, desperate to deflect Amira's concern that something was wrong. "We're getting serious." Amira's squeal of delight had echoed through the phone. Within minutes, their mother knew. Within an hour, extended family was texting, "Congratulations." Within a day, the lie had grown wings she couldn't clip. "When's the wedding?" her grandmother had asked on a subsequent call. "We're taking it slow," mine had stammered. But slow hadn't been slow enough. 2 weeks ago, her family had started planning a reunion. The big kind, where aunts flew in from Atlanta and cousins drove from Philadelphia. The kind where everyone expected to meet the mysterious man who'd captured Saren Coleman's heart. "Bring him," her mother had said in that tone that wasn't really a request. "It's time we met this man who's got my daughter glowing." Glowing? That's what her mother thought. In reality, Saren barely slept, haunted by the sounds that sometimes echoed from Raphael's office late at night. Sharp voices, threats delivered in Italian, the kind of conversations that made her bury her head under her pillow and pretend she heard nothing. She should have confessed the truth then. Should have admitted there was no boyfriend, no relationship, Nothing but a desperate lie to avoid her family's pity.
But she couldn't bear it.
Couldn't bear her mother's disappointed sigh, her grandmother's sympathetic headshake, Amira's well-meaning concern. If you're enjoying this story and want to see what happens next, please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Your support means everything to us as we continue bringing these stories to life. For once, just once, she wanted them to think she was doing okay, that she hadn't sacrificed everything, her social life, her dreams of nursing school, her own apartment, just to keep them afloat. So the lie had continued. And now, standing in Rafael Fernandez's office with her heart hammering against her ribs, she was paying the price. Your husband, Rafael repeated slowly, setting down the gold pen he'd been using. He leaned back in his leather chair, studying her with an intensity that made her want to disappear. You need me to pretend to be your husband. Just for one day, Saren rushed to clarify. A family reunion this Saturday, just a few hours. I know it's crazy. I know I shouldn't even be asking, but her voice cracked. I told them I was married, and now they want to meet him, and I don't have anyone else I can ask, and I'll pay you back however you want. Extra hours, whatever you why. The single word cut through her rambling like a blade. Saren blinked.
Why? What?
Why did you tell them you were married? The question hung in the air between them. Saren's first instinct was to deflect, to give some surface explanation, but something in Raphael's expression, not judgment, but genuine curiosity, made the truth tumble out. Because I'm 26 and still cleaning houses, she whispered. Because my little sister is in college and I never even started. Because my mother works 2 jobs at 63 and I can't seem to earn enough to tell her to stop. Because every family gathering they look at me with pity, and I wanted them to think I was doing okay, that someone thought I was worth choosing. Her eyes burned with tears she refused to shed. Not here, not in front of him. Raphael was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd ever heard it. What did you tell them about this husband? Hope flickered in her chest. That he's successful, that we met at work, that he treats me well. She paused. That he makes me happy. Something flashed across Raphael's face, an emotion too quick to identify. He stood moving around the desk with the fluid grace of a predator. Saren forced herself not to step back as he approached, stopping just close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and woodsy that probably cost more than her monthly salary. One day, he said quietly.
Just Saturday.
Just Saturday, Saren confirmed, barely breathing. I promise after that I'll never ask you for anything again. I'll go back to being invisible. You were never invisible, Saren. The words hit her like a physical blow. She looked up sharply, meeting his eyes for the first time since entering his office. Something in his gaze made her pulse race for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. I'll do it, Raphael said. But on one condition. Of course, there was a condition. Men like him didn't do favors without strings attached. Saren steeled herself, prepared for some impossible demand. Tell me about your family, he said instead. Everything. I need to know who I'm going to meet if we're going to pull this off. What Saren didn't know was that Rafael Fernandez had noticed her from the very first day she'd walked into his penthouse. In 6 months, he'd memorized the sound of her humming while she worked. The way she always made sure his coffee was exactly 185 degrees. The dimple that appeared when she smiled at his head of security's terrible jokes. He'd told himself it was nothing. She was staff off limits from a world so different from his that they might as well have lived on different planets. But now she'd asked him the one thing that shattered every wall he'd built. She'd asked him to be close to her. And Rafael Fernandez had never been good at denying himself what he wanted. The week before the reunion passed in a blur of surreal moments that Saren kept thinking she'd wake up from. Rafael insisted on details, not just names and faces, but stories. He wanted to know that her mother, Esther, had raised 2 daughters alone after their father died when Saren was 12. That her grandmother, Mama Rose, made the best sweet potato pie in Brooklyn and didn't trust any man who couldn't look her in the eye. That her sister Amira was brilliant and fierce and had a tendency to interrogate anyone who came near her family. She's going to grill you, Saren warned as they sat in his office Wednesday evening. She'd become accustomed to these evening briefings, though they still felt strange, sitting across from Rafael Fernandez, watching him take notes like he was planning a business merger instead of a fake family reunion. I can handle interrogation, Rafael said dryly. A smile tugged at his lips, rare enough that it made Saren's breath catch. I've been trained by experts. The joke was dark, but it made her laugh despite herself. Over the past few days, she discovered that underneath the terrifying exterior was a man who noticed things, small things, important things. He'd noticed she took her coffee with 2 sugars but no cream. He'd noticed she always tucked her hair behind her left ear when she was nervous. He'd noticed that she wore the same pair of work shoes every day because they were probably the only comfortable ones she owned. That last observation had resulted in a package being delivered to her room Thursday morning, a box from an expensive boutique containing not just new shoes, but a complete outfit for Saturday. The note read in Raphael's sharp handwriting, "You shouldn't have to worry about what to wear." The dress was beautiful, emerald green that would complement her dark skin, cut in a style that was elegant without being too formal. It fit perfectly, which meant he'd somehow figured out her size without asking. The thought should have been invasive, but instead it made something warm bloom in her chest. She'd never had anyone pay attention to her like this. Not romantic partners who drifted in and out of her life, too focused on themselves to notice when she was struggling. Not even well-meaning friends who assumed she was fine because she always smiled and said she was. But Rafael Fernandez noticed everything. Friday evening, his head of security, a bear of a man named Marco, who'd always been kind to her, pulled her aside in the kitchen. "Boss is taking this seriously," Marco said quietly. His weathered face creased with something that might have been concern. "You know that, right?" Sarah nodded, though she wasn't sure what Marco meant. Of course, Raphael was taking it seriously. He was meticulous about everything. "I mean, really seriously," Marco continued. "He's been asking questions about your neighborhood, your family, making sure everything's safe." He paused. "Raphael doesn't do favors, Saren. Not for anyone. The fact that he's doing this for you." He trailed off, leaving the sentence unfinished. But the implication hung in the air, making Saren's heart pound. No, that was impossible. Men like Rafael Fernandez didn't notice women like her.
Not in that way.
This was just a transaction, a favor she'd somehow convinced him to grant. Nothing more. But that night, as she lay in her small room, she couldn't stop thinking about the way he'd looked at her during their briefing sessions. The way his attention felt like sunlight, warm and intense, and focused entirely on her. The way he'd smiled when she told him about Mama Rose's infamous Sunday dinners, where showing up without an appetite was considered a personal insult. "I'll make sure to come hungry," he'd said, and something in his tone had made it sound like a promise. Saturday morning arrived too quickly. Saren stood in her room staring at the dress laid out on her bed, her stomach tied in knots. This was insane. This was never going to work. Her family would see through it immediately, and then she'd have to confess everything. The lie, the desperate request, the fact that she'd somehow convinced a mafia boss to play pretend for a day. A knock on her door made her jump. "Saren." Raphael's voice muffled through the wood. "Can I come in?" She opened the door to find him dressed more casually than she'd ever seen. Dark jeans, a black button-down with the sleeves rolled to his elbows, showing forearms corded with muscle and marked with a tattoo she'd never noticed before. He looked different, less like a crime lord and more like a dangerously handsome man who might actually belong at a family reunion.
You look terrified, he observed.
"I am terrified," Saren admitted. "This is a terrible idea. We should just cancel. I'll tell them you're sick." Raphael caught her hand, stopping her spiral. His touch was gentle but firm, his palm warm against hers. "Breathe," he said quietly. "We're going to be fine. Trust me." "You're a crime boss," Saren blurted out. "How are you going to fit in at a Brooklyn family reunion?" Something flashed across his face. Amusement mixed with something darker. "Saren, I grew up in Red Hook. My grandmother made gravy every Sunday and smacked me with a wooden spoon when I talked back. I know exactly how to act at a family reunion." She blinked at him. She'd never thought about Raphael having a childhood, having a family, having a grandmother who'd cooked and scolded like everyone else's. He seemed too powerful, too untouchable to have ever been an ordinary boy in Brooklyn. Besides, he continued, a small smile playing at his lips. I have an advantage.
What's that?
I don't have to pretend to think you're worth choosing. The words landed like a punch to her chest. Before Saren could process them, before she could ask what he meant, Raphael squeezed her hand once and stepped back. Get dressed, he said, his tone returning to something more businesslike. We leave in 30 minutes. And Saren, she looked up at him. Stop being invisible, he said quietly. At least for today. As Saren and Raphael prepared to face her family, neither of them realized that the line between pretending and reality was already beginning to blur, because the truth was Raphael had been falling for his maid since the day she'd started humming old Madone songs while folding his laundry. And Saren, she was about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous man in the room is the one who makes you feel safest. Mama Rose's house in Brooklyn was exactly as Saren had described it. A narrow brownstone bursting with life, music spilling from open windows, the scent of fried chicken and collard greens heavy in the summer air. Cars lined both sides of the street, and the sound of laughter and competing conversations created a symphony of organized chaos. Raphael's black SUV looked out of place in this neighborhood, too sleek and expensive. Marco was driving with two other security men in a second vehicle behind them, a precaution Raphael had insisted on despite Saren's protests. They'll think you're paranoid, she'd argued. I am paranoid, he'd replied simply. It's kept me alive this long. Now, as they parked and Saren saw the crowd gathering on the front porch, her anxiety spiked to a new level. There's still time to run, she whispered. Raphael turned to her, his hand finding hers again. The gesture was becoming familiar, grounding. Saren, look at me, she did. I've negotiated with cartel bosses and Russian mobsters, he said, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a way that sent electricity up her arm. I think I can handle your grandmother.
Despite everything, she laughed.
The sound seemed to please him, because that rare smile appeared again. There she is, he murmured. Then, before she could ask what he meant, he was out of the car and moving around to open her door, a gentleman's gesture that felt both performative and strangely genuine. The moment Saren stepped onto the sidewalk, the shouting began. Saren, girl, get over here. Is that him? Oh my God, he's real. Amira was flying down the porch steps, her braids streaming behind her, excitement radiating from every paw. She crashed into Saren with a hug that nearly knocked them both over, then immediately turned to Raphael with unabashed curiosity. So, you're the mystery man? Amira said, hands on her hips, studying him with the intensity of a prosecutor examining a suspect. The one who swept my sister off her feet and made her forget her family exists. Amira, Saren hissed. But Raphael just smiled, a real smile, warm and disarming. You must be the brilliant little sister I've heard so much about. Columbia, right?
Pre-law.
Amira's eyes widened slightly, clearly not expecting him to know details about her. Yeah. How did Saren talks about you constantly? Raphael said smoothly, his hand finding the small of Saren's back in a gesture that looked completely natural. She's incredibly proud of you. It was the perfect thing to say. Amira's suspicious expression softened immediately, and Saren felt a rush of gratitude so intense it almost brought tears to her eyes. He'd done his homework. More than that, he'd understood exactly what her family needed to hear. The next hour was a whirlwind of introductions. Mama Rose, who hugged Raphael like he was already family, and immediately started interrogating him about his intentions. Aunt Carol, who kept whispering to Saren about how handsome he was. Uncle Jerome, who wanted to talk about the Yankees. Cousins, neighbors, family, friends. All of them curious, welcoming, pulling Raphael into conversations about everything from politics to the best pizza spots in Brooklyn. And through it all, Raphael was perfect. He complimented Mama Rose's cooking with genuine enthusiasm. He listened intently to Uncle Jerome's baseball theories. He asked thoughtful questions and laughed at jokes, and somehow remembered everyone's names, even though Saren herself sometimes got her third cousins mixed up. But it was the small touches that sold it. His hand on her lower back as they moved through the crowded house. The way he'd brush her hair behind her ear when she was talking, an intimate gesture that made her cousin sigh. The protective stance he took whenever someone got too loud or too close. It all felt so real that Saren had to keep reminding herself it wasn't. Saren, honey, can you help me in the kitchen for a minute? Her mother's voice cut through her thoughts. Esther Coleman was smiling, but there was something in her eyes that made Saren's stomach clench. The we need to talk look that every daughter recognizes. In the kitchen, away from the noise of the party, her mother turned to face her with an expression Saren couldn't quite read. He's wonderful, Esther said quietly, attentive, respectful, clearly crazy about you, Mom. But baby, I need to ask you something. Her mother's hand found hers, squeezing gently. Are you happy? Really happy? Because you've been distant these past months, and I've been worried. This man, this life you're building with him, is it what you want? Or is it what you think we want for you? The question hit too close to home. Saren's throat tightened. I'm happy, she managed. It wasn't entirely a lie. Standing in Raphael's presence, feeling protected and seen and valued. Those moments had felt more real than anything in her life lately. Her mother studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Okay, but Saren, if you ever need help, if you're ever in trouble, you tell me. You hear me? I don't care about pride or what the family thinks. You're my daughter, and your safety comes first. It was such a specific warning that for a moment Saren wondered if her mother somehow knew the truth, knew what Raphael really was. But that was impossible, wasn't it? Before she could respond, a commotion from the living room made them both turn. Raised voices, someone shouting, and above it all, a voice Saren hadn't heard in over a year, but would recognize anywhere. Julian, her ex-boyfriend, the one who'd left her when her mother got sick, who told her she was too much work and too focused on other people to be worth his time, the man who'd made her feel small and disposable and convinced her she'd never be anyone's priority. What the hell was he doing here? Saren rushed back to the living room with her mother close behind, her heart sinking as she took in the scene. Julian stood near the front door, dressed too flashily for a family reunion, gold chains glinting. He must have come with someone's plus one. He'd always been good at inserting himself where he wasn't wanted. But what made Saren's blood run cold was the look on his face as he stared at Raphael. Recognition, fear, and something else. Calculation. Fernandez, Julian said slowly, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. Raphael Castella Sereno. Oh, this is rich. This is __ rich. Raphael's entire demeanor changed. The easy warmth vanished, replaced by something cold and dangerous. He moved in front of Saren in a subtle but unmistakable protective gesture. You know each other? Amira asked, confusion evident in her voice. Julian laughed, but it was an ugly sound. Know each other? Everyone in New York knows Rafael Fernandez. He's an old acquaintance. Raphael cut him off smoothly, his voice carrying an edge that made Julian stop mid-sentence. We did business together, once briefly. The emphasis on briefly was pointed, threatening. Julian's face flushed, but he couldn't seem to help himself. Business, right? Is that what we're calling it now? He turned to Saren, his expression twisting into something cruel. Does your family know what your husband really does for a living, Saren? Does your sweet grandmother know? He didn't get to finish the sentence. Raphael moved with shocking speed, closing the distance between them in 2 strides. He didn't touch Julian. Didn't have to. Just leaned in close and whispered something in his ear that Saren couldn't hear, but made Julian go pale. Then Raphael straightened, his hand finding Saren's, and turned to face her family with that charming smile back in place. I apologize for the interruption, he said smoothly. Julian and I had a business disagreement some time ago. Water under the bridge now, of course. The way he said it made it clear there would be consequences if Julian said another word. Shall we continue the party? In that moment, everything changed. Saren's family had just witnessed a glimpse of who Rafael Fernandez really was, and worse, they'd seen that Saren was connected to him. The lie she'd told to protect her dignity was about to explode in her face in ways she'd never imagined. But what terrified her most wasn't her family's judgment. It was the realization that somewhere between the lie and this moment, her feelings for Raphael had become devastatingly real. The party recovered, but barely. Julian had left quickly after Raphael's intervention. Practically ran out the door, according to Aunt Carol. But the damage was done. Saren could feel the shift in the room, see it in the way her family looked at Raphael now. Curiosity had become caution. Welcome had become weariness. Mama Rose, bless her, had tried to smooth things over by announcing dessert, but as Saren helped carry dishes to the kitchen, she could hear the whispered conversation starting. Did you see his face when he talked to Julian? What kind of business disagreement was that? Something's not right about this. Amira cornered her near the sink. Saren, what the hell is going on? Nothing, Saren said, automatically. Julian was just being Julian. Don't lie to me. Amira's voice was low but fierce. I saw the way Raphael looked at him. That wasn't normal. That was she struggled for words. That was dangerous, Saren.
Who is he really?
What have you gotten yourself into? Before Saren could answer, Raphael appeared in the doorway. Saren, we should go. I think we've imposed on your family's hospitality long enough. It was phrased politely, but Saren understood the subtext. They needed to leave before more questions were asked, before more truths came tumbling out. The goodbyes were awkward. Mama Rose hugged them both, but her expression was troubled. Esther pulled Saren aside one more time. Baby, that warning I gave you earlier, I meant it. If you need help, I'm fine, Mom. I promise. But as they drove away from the brownstone, Saren knew she'd never been less fine in her life. They rode in silence for 10 minutes before Raphael spoke. I'm sorry. Saren looked at him in surprise. For what? For Julian? For the scene? For putting you in that position? His jaw was tight, his hands gripping the steering wheel. He dismissed Marco and insisted on driving himself. I should have anticipated someone from your past might be there. Should have been more prepared. You couldn't have known, Saren said quietly. Then because she needed to know. What did you say to him? What made him leave like that? Raphael was silent for a moment. I reminded him that his sister lives in Hoboken, his mother in Queens, his nephew goes to PS 132. He glanced at her, his expression unreadable. I didn't threaten them. I just made it clear I knew where they were. That was enough. The casual way he said it, the implication that he could reach anyone, anywhere, anytime should have terrified her. Instead, all Saren felt was a strange sense of security because that same power, that same reach, was currently aimed at protecting her. He knew you, she said.
How?
I bought out his debt 3 years ago, Raphael explained. He owed money to some very bad people. I paid it off and made him work for me for 6 months to clear it. He was unreliable, sloppy. I let him go, but he never forgot. Of course. Of course Julian had been in debt, had been tangled up with dangerous people. It explained so much about why he'd been so volatile, so desperate, so willing to walk away from anyone who needed him. Did he? Saren swallowed hard. Did he hurt people when he worked for you?
No.
Raphael's answer was immediate and firm. He was low-level. Delivery runs, basic courier work. Nothing violent. I don't let people near the real operations unless I trust them completely. And I've never trusted Julian. They pulled up to the penthouse building. The doorman greeted them with his usual nod, but Saren felt like she was seeing everything through new eyes. This building, this world, the armed men in the lobby pretending to be regular security. All of it was Raphael's kingdom, and she'd been living in it for 6 months without truly understanding what that meant. In the elevator, Saren finally asked the question that had been burning in her chest since they left Brooklyn. Why did you do it? Why did you really agree to pretend to be my husband? Raphael looked at her, and in the close confines of the elevator, she could see every detail of his face, the sharp jawline, the intensity in his dark eyes, the small scar near his temple she'd never noticed before. Because you asked, he said simply. And because I wanted to. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. The elevator dinged, doors opening to the penthouse floor. But Raphael didn't move, just kept looking at her with an expression that made her heart race. You think you're invisible, Near? You think you don't matter, that you're easy to overlook, that you're just someone who cleans and cooks and fades into the background. But you're wrong. He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel his warmth. I notice every time you hum while you work. I notice that you organize my books by color, even though I've never asked you to. I notice that you always leave the coffee maker ready for the morning with the good beans on the counter, so I don't have to search for them. I notice that you water the plant in my office, the one I thought was dead until you brought it back to life. Saren's breath caught. She hadn't realized he'd noticed any of that. Hadn't thought he paid attention to anything she did beyond the basic requirements of her job. I notice you, not Coleman, Raphael said quietly, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. I've noticed you since the day you walked into my home. So when you asked me to pretend to be your husband, to pretend I'd chosen you, to pretend you mattered to me, it wasn't pretending. Not for me. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Sarah knew she should step back, should maintain professional distance, should remember that he was her employer and she was his maid, and this could never, ever work. But instead, she leaned into his touch. Raphael, she whispered, and the sound of his name, not Sir, not Mr. Fernandez, just his name, seemed to break something in him. He kissed her. It was gentle at first, questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Saren didn't pull away. She rose on her toes and kissed him back, her hands finding the front of his shirt, and suddenly gentle wasn't enough. His arms wrapped around her, pulling her closer, and she lost herself in the sensation of being wanted this intensely, this completely. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Raphael rested his forehead against hers. This is a terrible idea, he murmured. The worst, Saren agreed. I'm dangerous. My life is dangerous. You'd be safer if you ran as far from me as possible. I know. You should quit tomorrow. I'll give you 6 months severance and a reference for any job you want. You should get away from me before this goes any further. Is that what you want? Saren asked, even though her heart was breaking at the thought.
No.
His grip on her tightened. What I want is to keep you here, keep you close, keep you safe. What I want is to be the man you describe to your family, the one who treats you well, who makes you happy, who thinks you're worth choosing, but wanting something and deserving it are two different things. Saren pulled back enough to look him in the eyes. What if I think you deserve it? Then you don't know me well enough yet, so let me know you. The words came out fierce, determined. Stop deciding what's best for me, Raphael. Let me make my own choices.
And I choose this.
I choose you. Even knowing what you are, what you do. I choose you. Something in his expression cracked. Relief and fear, and want all mixed together. Saren. Whatever he was going to say was interrupted by his phone ringing. Raphael pulled it out, his face hardening as he saw the caller ID. I have to take this, he said, regret coloring his tone. It's important. He stepped away, answering in rapid Italian. Saren couldn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. Urgent, dangerous, the kind of business that reminded her exactly what world she was entering if she pursued this. But as she watched him pace the hallway, phone pressed to his ear, all she could think was that she'd already made her choice. The only question was whether Raphael would let her stay. Everything was about to change because while Saren and Raphael were discovering feelings they'd both tried to deny, Julian was making calls of his own to people who'd been looking for any excuse to move against Raphael Fernandez and Saren Coleman. The woman Raphael Fernandez had just admitted he couldn't resist, had just become the perfect target. The call was from Marco, and the news was bad. Boss, we've got a situation. Marco's voice was tense through the phone. Julian made contact with the Volov brothers. He's telling them about the girl. Raphael's blood ran cold. The Volov brothers, Russian mob, ruthless and currently in a territory dispute with Raphael's organization. If they knew about Saren, if they thought she mattered to him, where's he now? We're tracking him, but boss, he's already given them her name, her family's address. They know about her mother, her sister. Get everyone to Brooklyn now. Full protection detail on the family. Raphael's voice was ice. And find Julian. I want him in front of me within the hour. He ended the call and turned to find Saren watching him, fear dawning in her eyes. She'd heard enough to understand. My family, she said, they're in danger because of me. Because of what Julian said.
No.
Raphael closed the distance between them, gripping her shoulders. They're in danger because of me. Because Julian wants to hurt me, and now he knows the best way to do it is through you. But I won't let that happen. Do you hear me? I will protect your family. I will protect you.
How?
Saren's voice broke. How can you protect everyone? My mother, Amira, Mama Rose. They're all over Brooklyn, Raphael. You can't watch all of them. Watch me. And he meant it. Over the next 12 hours, Saren witnessed the full extent of Rafael Fernandez's power. Within 30 minutes, armed guards were stationed outside her mother's apartment, Amira's dorm, and Mama Rose's brownstone. Within an hour, every member of her extended family had been contacted with cover stories, gas leak evacuations, temporary relocations to hotels, all expenses paid. Within 2 hours, Marco had located Julian trying to leave the city and had him delivered to a warehouse Raphael owned in Red Hook. Saren insisted on coming with him to face Julian. You don't want to see this, Raphael warned as they pulled up to the warehouse. He put my family in danger, Saren said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her. I need to see this. The warehouse was cold, industrial, the kind of place that saw business most people never wanted to know about. Julian was tied to a chair in the center, blood trickling from his nose, where one of Raphael's men had apparently gotten impatient. When Julian saw Saren walk in behind Raphael, his expression twisted with bitter satisfaction. There she is, he spat, the maid playing princess. Did you really think you could be with him, Saren? Did you really think you belonged in his world? That's enough, Raphael said quietly. But there was death in his voice. She's nothing to you, Julian continued as if he couldn't help himself. Just another piece, another game. You'll get tired of her like you get tired of everything, and then she'll be left with nothing worse than nothing because everyone will know she was yours. I said, that's enough. Raphael moved forward, and this time there was no mistaking the threat. But Saren stepped forward first. You're wrong, she said, her voice clear and strong. I'm not playing anything, and you don't get to decide my worth, Julian. You never did. You treated me like I was disposable, like caring about my family made me weak, like having responsibilities made me less than. But Raphael, she looked at the man standing beside her. He sees my strength. He values my loyalty. He understands that caring for others doesn't make me weak. It makes me who I am. She turned back to Julian. So you can tell the Volivs whatever you want. You can try to use me to hurt Raphael, but you'll fail because, unlike you, Raphael actually keeps his promises. And he promised to protect my family, so they're safe and I'm safe. And you? She shook her head. You're nothing but a coward who sells out people to save himself. The look on Julian's face was pure shock. He'd never heard Saren speak like this. Had never seen this side of her. The side that Raphael had recognized from the beginning. Fierce, brave, unbreakable. Raphael handled Julian. Saren didn't ask for details. Didn't want to know, but she understood that Julian would never be a threat again to her or to anyone. The message had been sent to the Volivs as well. Saren Coleman was under Raphael Fernandez's protection, and anyone who touched her would face consequences they couldn't imagine. By dawn, the danger had passed. Her family was safe, returned to their homes with additional security measures they'd never notice. Amira had texted her 12 times, asking what was going on. Her mother had called, worried, but reassured by Raphael's smooth explanations of precautionary measures due to business concerns. In the penthouse, as the sun rose over Manhattan, Saren and Raphael stood by the floor toe-ceiling windows, watching the city wake up. I should quit, Saren said quietly. Not because you're telling me to, but because staying here is your maid when we both know what this is. It doesn't feel right anymore. Then don't be my maid. Raphael turned to her, taking her hands in his. Be with me. Really be with me. Not pretending, not hiding. I want you in my life, near. I want to be the husband I pretended to be yesterday. I want to earn the right to stand beside you at your family reunions. I want he stopped struggling with words. I want what we had yesterday to be real. It was real, Saren said, tears spilling down her cheeks. For me, it was always real. I just didn't think you could feel the same way. I fell for you months ago, Raphael admitted. But I told myself it was impossible. That you deserved better than me, safer than me.
And you do, Saren.
You do deserve better. But I'm too selfish to let you go. Then don't. She rose on her toes and kissed him soft and sweet and full of promise. Don't let me go. And I won't let you go either. It won't be easy, Raphael warned. My world is dangerous. There will always be threats, always be risks. I know. Saren smiled through her tears. But you'll protect me, and I'll protect you right back. That's what love does, right? It makes you stronger together than you ever were apart.
Love.
The word hung between them, terrifying and exhilarating. I love you, Raphael said like he was testing how the words felt. Then, more confidently, I love you, Saren Coleman. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me, and I don't deserve you. But I'm going to spend every day trying to be worthy of you anyway. You already are, Saren whispered. You were from the moment you said yes to a crazy request from a terrified maid. You were when you protected my family without me even asking. You were when you saw me, really saw me, when I thought I was invisible. They stood there as the sun climbed higher. Two people from different worlds who'd found each other through an impossible request and a day of pretending that had become the realest thing either of them had ever experienced. And Saren realized that sometimes the most dangerous thing you could do was open your heart. But sometimes with the right person, that danger was worth every risk. One innocent request, one impossible favor, one day of pretending that changed everything. Saren Coleman had asked Rafael Fernandez to be her husband for a single day, never imagining that he'd want the role permanently. But that's the thing about pretending. Sometimes the mask becomes the face, and the lie becomes the truth. And sometimes the most powerful man in New York surrenders not to rivals or enemies, but to a woman who saw past his power to the man underneath. Because real strength isn't about control or fear. It's about choosing to be vulnerable with someone who makes you brave. Mama Rose's Thanksgiving dinner was even more chaotic than usual. But this time, Rafael Fernandez sat at the table, not as a pretend husband, but as family. Saren watched him from across the table, laughing at something Uncle Jerome was saying about the Knicks' terrible season. He'd become a regular fixture at family gatherings, showing up with expensive wine that Mama Rose would claim was too fancy before serving it anyway, helping her mother in the kitchen, tolerating Amira's increasingly comfortable teasing. He's good for you, Esther had told Saren last month. Her earlier concerns laid to rest by 6 months of watching Raphael treat her daughter like she was precious. I see the way he looks at you like you hung the moon. And the stars, Amira had added with a grin. It's actually kind of disgusting how in love you two are, but they were in love. Impossibly against all odds, they'd built something real from a foundation of pretense. Saren had gone back to school, nursing school, the dream she'd put on hold years ago. Raphael had insisted on paying for it, had cleared her mother's medical debt without being asked, had set up a trust for Amira's law school tuition, but more than the money, he'd given Saren the freedom to dream again, to see herself as more than just someone who survived. What are you thinking about? Raphael asked later that night, as they drove back to the penthouse, their penthouse now, not his employer's. That day, Saren admitted when I asked you to pretend to be my husband. I was so scared, so desperate. And now I'm so grateful. She reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together, because that desperate request led me to you. Really to you. Not just the man you showed the world, but all of you. Raphael brought her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles. I am the grateful one.
You saved me, Saren.
I didn't even know I needed saving until you walked into my life and reminded me what it felt like to be human instead of just dangerous. They pulled up to their building. The doorman greeted them warmly. Everyone knew Mrs. Costella Sereno now knew she wasn't staff, but the boss's wife. knew that Rafael Fernandez had shocked everyone by actually falling in love. In the elevator, Saren leaned against him content. Do you ever regret it saying yes that day? Never. Raphael's arms wrapped around her, solid and safe. Best decision I ever made. Well, second best. What was the first? Asking you to marry me for real. Saren smiled, the engagement ring on her finger catching the light. The proposal had come 2 months ago. Not flashy or public, but private and perfect. Just the two of them, and a question that Saren had answered before Raphael even finished asking. I love you, she said, simple and true. I love you too, Raphael replied. My wife for real this time. And as the elevator carried them home, Saren reflected on the strange, wonderful journey that had brought them here. It had started with a lie and a desperate request. It had led through danger and fear and impossible odds, but it had ended with truth, with love, with a life neither of them had expected, but both of them had chosen. Sometimes Saren thought the best love stories start with pretending, because pretending forces you to imagine what could be. And if you're lucky, if you're very, very lucky, that imagination becomes reality, and the role you were playing becomes who you really are. Rafael Fernandez had pretended to be her husband for one day, but he'd chosen to be her husband for life. And that was worth every risk, every danger, every moment of fear. Because love, real love, was always worth it. Thank you all for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please write in the comments where you're watching from. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video as your support is important for me to continue creating content.